This network has established more than 500 startups. The core idea was about the productivity. So I was very angry. Productivity is extremely low. Trying to look on this industry in absolutely another way, conveyor of innovation. People will learn how to produce companies. In the future, it will be enough hundreds of cases to start the same business. Startup studio is about the usual people who would not do their own technology business without startup studios. Why should these entrepreneurs come to us? The answer is easy. They should not. The company do not need you at the beginning partnership with us, not in startups, but in startup studio.
Denis Kovalevich, please introduce yourself, just maybe a short description of your career and entrepreneurial path. And then I would ask you for the first main question, like, what do you think is the most interesting idea you want to share with all venture studios around the world?
Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. The main thing from my personal history is that in 2012, me and some of my partners, we opened the startup studio in deeptech. So first of all, quite early. Second, not in a traditional IT or internet industry, but in deeptech. It's called Technospark. It was situated in not far from Moscow. And it was also not only this startup studio, but also a network, branches or affiliated startup studios in other cities. So in general, through the first 7 years that I can describe, this network has established more than 500 startups. 500. All of them are in material-based areas. So from electronics through the photovoltaics and the composites to the genomics and biomed. So quite wide range of topics. So that is the main project of my life, I can say, and that is what I was focusing. The most interesting part of my biography. But previously, I had 8 years in corporate sectors, mostly in the position of strategic and investments, attracting investments and preparing for IPO and so on and so on. And before this, I started at the end of 19th as my private companies with a few of my partners in the consultants area. So we finished together one of the best university in the business and in economy, and then we started company and made a consultancy. 5 years in consultancy, 8 years in corporate strategic management, and then more than last 10 years, already 12 years in entrepreneurship, technology entrepreneurship. From 2012. Deep tech startup studio, quite large one. I think at some times it was the largest one in the world in deep tech. If you're looking in deep tech.
What do you think is the main idea or the most inspiring for you idea which you want to share with other studio founders?
For me, the core idea was about the productivity of the venture industry. So I was very angry on the productivity of the traditional corporate sector in terms of innovations and productivity of traditional classic venture world. When we are looking on venture funds and the whole system that is starting far before venture funds and then venture funds, different stages and so on, we see that the productivity is extremely low. I started from this idea. I thought always, and I'm thinking still, that startup studio is the model that could bring absolutely another level of productivity in venture industry. So not 1 in 10,000. Not 1 in 1,000, not 1 in 100, but some tens percent, like anyone else in a like any other production should be working in a quite high level of efficiency. So that is the idea. From my point of view, that is the main idea of Startup Studio. So I think that startup, if you will ask who is the competitor of Startup Studio, what you will tell, Max?
I will tell that venture capital accelerators and even more entrepreneurs launching their companies without studios, and even more, it is the market doesn't understand the studio model, and so actually the venture studios are going to educate what are venture studios, what are good way to launch many companies in parallel and more efficient way. Ignorance of the market is also, I would say, is a competitor for the venture studio model.
I think we should ask ourselves who are the clients and what is the product, and then we could understand who is competitor. And if we will look on a product, what is the product of Startup Studio? From my point of view, the product of Startup Studio is startup. So if we will look on a startup as on a product, we will understand that the main competitor of the Startup Studio, from my point of view, is a venture capital funds, not the accelerators, because accelerators, not incubators, are selling startups. None of them. They are supporting founders. So that is why I agree with you that there are two competitors. One is venture capital funds, other are solo entrepreneurs. That are two positions that want to sell the startup. So, and here is the Startup Studio. So that is why I think that we should compare the efficiency of Startup Studio not with incubators or not with accelerators, but with solar entrepreneurs and venture funds. And that is where we see the real gap that Startup Studio could grow or could fill.
Let's try to compare to venture capital. So you give this picture that venture capital fund looks for a hero type founder that will create next unicorn, and they filter thousands of founders and choose ones to invest and back their startups. You say that it is not very efficient because you are relying on some super talent, which is very rare, and the probability of success is also very small. Is this your thoughts, and what is wrong with this model? What is wrong with having 50x or 500x for one deal if you have, let's say, 30 companies or 100 companies in your portfolio?
I don't think that there is something wrong with this. Absolutely okay. No any doubt with anybody who is inside. But I am looking on this picture from let's say another angle. For me, the situation when from 1,000 or a few thousand trials, at the end we get one positive result, that should bring so much money that will finance all the process before. That is something incredibly not efficient. That is my point. It's not I'm who is looking like this. It's a common view in terms of if you will calculate the efficiency. But people usually do not like to calculate the efficiency of the venture industry. But I think we should. When we are speaking about the unicorns and very high capitalizations of startups, why should it be so? Why should be so large capitalization? Why it should be 100x or something like this? In order, just because the venture funds and all the system need to finance everything, all the trials. So one finance everybody else. For me, it's strange. If we will look for how many people could become technology entrepreneurs, but they would not because of the pyramid system, because of this funnel in which you need to go and to live in the lows of this funnel. I think we could look. My angle is trying to look on this industry in absolutely another way, on a fabric,
Mhm.
in a conveyor way. That is why one of the articles that one of me and my good friend Peter Shidrovitsky we wrote in 2015 were named conveyor of innovation. So because I think the next stage, the next 100 years, it will be the company, the startup will become a product itself. People will learn how to produce companies in a mass way. So in a way that hundred thousands people will produce startups and they will sell it. They will sell startups and it will be the new professional from my point of view. The same as the management 150 years ago. What happened with the management? If we will look, I don't know, to 200 years ago, and we will discuss at that time about something around management, we will discuss just in the same way as we now discussing entrepreneurship. So it's a talent, we would say, 200 years ago. It's a miracle. People should be born with some skills that are coming from a god or something like this. It's nothing that we could do with this, we would say. But only after 50 years, 70 years after this conversation, we would see that the management appeared as a new professional. Faculty of management appeared in universities. Business school appeared. I think that so-called venture building part of entrepreneurship will have the same future. So the creation of startups, creation not only, and we are talking not only about the technology startups, but mostly, will become as a regular profession. And people will create much more startups that it were before. It will be not one in 10,000 succeeded, but much more. We should not, in this future, we should not rely only on creating unicorns, but regular companies, regular technology entrepreneurs creating regular companies. And the question, how could they do this? Without startup studio, without such organizations or such models like startup studios, they could not. They will not be able to do this. So I
I
think,
think I
I
think
think, I think yes, because I think that one of the comment in a previous discussion was very correct. It's startup studio is about democratization of entrepreneurship, technology entrepreneurship. So giving to much more people access to the not only to the technologies but also to become entrepreneurs. We did it in my startup studio in a previous. We did it. We spent a lot of time to trying to build a system where regular people could come on a position of venture builders, take the responsibility of the startups they that was created not by them. So the ideas was not their ideas. They took it from startup studio. They use the infrastructure of startup studio. They use very early, the most earliest capital from startup studio, and they playing the role of venture builders, just venture builders. So just early stage entrepreneurs. And when we focus the activity of this position on just main points of company building, venture building, when we put away uh, investment attracting, when we put away ideation, and when we put away from the core position of venture building the searching of infrastructure and technologies. So we keep them only on a building of a startup. It suddenly become much more effective. It's like an effect of focusing, like focus on focus. So it's become extremely focused activity. So I think that that is why I'm telling that only in a context of the startup studio, such democratization of entrepreneurship could be done, because startup studio should take on itself ideation, first capital, and infrastructure. So if startup studio plays these three functions, to that platform, let's say so, could come a regular person with some skills, entrepreneurial skills that he will bring on himself, and play a role of, let's say, founder in residence in extremely effective way, in a much more effective way than that, compared to the situation if he would do everything by himself or by herself. So that is, I think, the main difference.
You're talking about deep tech studios.
My experience in deep tech studios, I don't think that I'm talking only about deep tech studios. Yes, I had experience only in deep tech, not in software.
I would say that entrepreneurship today is already democratized, so you don't need a lot of capital to start your online business, or you don't have a lot of capital to start like hundreds of different business ideas. So it is step by step. It's becoming more easier and easier, even with ChatGPT. So you have like
I fully agree.
AI
Max, I fully agree with you. Yeah. If we look on numbers at the end of at the beginning of zeros, to start online startups at that time cost a few millions. Now it's a few dozen of case, not a millions at all. But if we will look to deep tech, yes, I agree, it's coming much slower and much later than online businesses. And this process of, let's say, democratization of entrepreneurship, technology entrepreneurship in deep tech started only like 5-7 years ago. We started to see the decrease of investment required for each particular startup. 12 years ago, if you want to start a new company in robotics, for example, for logistics, robots for logistics, you need 10, 20, 30 million in a 5-7 years. In order just to build the robot, to develop it, to build the small production site and so on, and to test it, to make all these pilots and so on. Now you could do the same with a few millions, with 1 to 3 millions. And I think in the future it will be enough hundreds of case to start the same business. Because yes, I agree that some of infrastructure became accessible, but in any case, you need quite professional money, and you need professional ideas. Why? Once again, why most of the startups that are creating by people who just finish the universities are failed? Easy, because how could they create a good idea? They never did anything before. It's just their first things in their life. Not too much people. I think you are one of the luckiest men who did the business and it was successful. But most of the ideas are just illusions. And when we are talking about startup studio, we are talking about some process of idea creation, and that is professional process. That is why startup studio is not about heroes, from my point of view, not about the heroes, and not about the people, the most brilliant entrepreneurs in the world. Startup studio is about the usual people who would not do their own technology business without startup studios. That is why they need each other. That is why it's strange for me always when startup studio are talking about how we will attract the best entrepreneurs. Why should these entrepreneurs come to us? The answer is easy. They should not. Why should best entrepreneurs going to startup studios? They should not. They should go to in a traditional way. They should go to venture funds and get high capitalization and so on
I
and so
have
on
the
and so on.
answer why.
Please.
You're talking about deep tech studios with very high barrier to entry to this field. And so, like in this way, it's much easier to explain to every entrepreneur that if you want to create deep tech startups, go to us and we'll help you because we have this infrastructure, capital, and understanding of the industry. If we are talking about not deep tech studios, but for example, studios creating software for specific industries, so they also can attract very experienced founders by understanding their field so well that they have better chances of success for each their company, because they reuse their customer base, they reuse understanding of the industry, and overall a startup can get revenue faster. If they need fundraising, they can fundraise faster because they reach certain metrics also faster, and the company has more probability of success if an entrepreneur partners with a studio because of its deep industry or niche expertise, experience, and reusing the existing customer bases, partner bases. So if you are launching your company independently, it is not so effective in terms of output in 10 years, because maybe you will have 100% of your company, but the results will be not so big as if you partner with the studio, give up some equity. So my answer to this question is because a studio has niche expertise that no other entrepreneur can get independently, or no other VC firm can get, because they don't work with the customers, partners. So this is my answer to software.
I hear you. I think that more and more, first of all, more and more venture funds are specialized now. So more and more focus funds. I see around me a much more focus industry focus fund, venture fund that it were like 10 years ago. So I think here in this point, venture funds will compete very hard with the startup studio, and they have some advantages. I mean, venture funds. They know industry not only from the managerial position, but from the position of selling to this industry their startups, their previous startups. It's another type of the knowledge. That is the first point. From another point of view, if we are talking about the industry knowledge, how it's convert to the business. From my point of view, it's converting through the ideas. And then it's very strange. If I am very sophisticated and experienced founder, I will probably have my own idea. I don't need startup studio to bring the idea to me. I will have my own hypothesis of what to do. And if I have my own hypothesis, if I have my own track record with a good experience, to be true, I don't see too much intensive in order to go to startup studios and then to play a role of star technology entrepreneur and to go through the traditional way of doing business. The real cooperation appearing only in the situation when both sides could not live with each other, without each other. only in that way it will be a real partnership.
At the same time, it is. I hear it like startup studios couldn't attract great entrepreneurs with very like understanding how to manage companies and how to find some innovative ways. So because entrepreneurship is about looking to somewhere where other people don't look at the moment, and so you are getting some advantage at those parts that are overlooked and people don't know that they need something. You're knowing how to solve their pain and you're creating companies. But I hear it like a destiny that, okay, studios couldn't attract great entrepreneurs. I know some studios that could attract existing entrepreneurs, but still it is like a destiny that we only will partner with those who can do it on their own. But I believe that entrepreneurs who could do this on their own are more valuable for studios at this moment, because with them studios will create more successful companies than with ordinary people. And of
Maybe,
course, there
maybe.
is I will finish my thoughts that
Yes, please. Yeah,
there
sorry.
is some advantage of working with ordinary people, that you can give them not 75% of equity or not 70% of equity to those entrepreneurs, but you can give them 20% of equity and they will be happy with this, and the studio will end up with 80% of equity. So I see the trade here that, like, if you know how to work effectively with ordinary entrepreneurs, you can have maybe better economics if you really dissect this entrepreneurship skill into, like, okay, I will do everything on the studio part, and entrepreneur, you please talk to customers, build the product, and these are instructions how to do this and how to find this innovative ways, how to find some overlooked niches or industries and create products for them. What do you think about, first of all, can studios attract very experienced founders? And then what do you think about attracting ordinary people when entrepreneurs have low amount of equity in each startup?
On the first question, once again, I think we already discussed it, but once again, from my point of view, experienced entrepreneurs will open their own studios. Why should they join somebody? They should open their own studios. If you are experienced entrepreneur, open your studio. You definitely has a lot of ideas. I was listening to one of your previous podcasts, and a man he from startup studio, I forgot his name. He told that they created more than 1,000 ideas. Yeah, it's. I understand it very easy. How could they do this? It's not too difficult if you are experienced entrepreneur. So if you are experienced entrepreneur, better do your own studio. Take somebody to your in a partnership and do your own studio. Why should you go to some other studio and starting some negotiations and so on? That is the first point. Because experienced
Agree.
means that you
Agree.
experienced means that you know something about the industry, some particular industry. So you could do your own studio in this particular industry. That is the first point. The second point about the shares, I don't think that that the problem is in how to spread the capital. I think the problem is the cost of the startup. So, from my point of view, startup studio should look on each startup in a cost base way. So, the crucial for any startup studio is the investment costs of the startup. If I could use 1 million euro in order to create 100 startups, in order to start 100 startups, or I could use 1 million euro to create only 10 startups. That is a main difference between the models, let's say, of traditional venture capital and startup studio. When you are creating a lot of startups, I mean 10 per year, 5, 10, 20 per year, you are starting to look on a startups in absolutely another way. You are not looking on a startups as on your kids. You don't have the my lovely kids. That is, you are starting to look as on each startup as just one product on the conveyor line. The situation that will be in the future, and that is how we try to organize in the past our startup studio. We thought that our co-founders should have partnership with us, not in startups, but in startup studio. So not 50 or 20 or doesn't matter how many percent of the shares in a startups, a few percent, but in startup studio. If you are a venture builder, you could build this startup, then in 2 years take the second one in startup studio.
Who will be the CEO?
You are, Max, could you be the CEO of 5 companies in parallel? I think yes.
Potentially, but I believe that
Yeah.
if you are 100% full-time CEO of one company, it's more
But
efficient.
the company do not need you at the beginning. Startup do not need your 100% of the time, because you are quite professional person. The company will need 10% of your time at the beginning. Then probably as older startup became, as larger startup is becoming, as more time it's needed, and yes, from some time it will need a 100% CEO. But at the beginning, companies, from all the companies that we created, I did not know any of the company that needed 100% of my time or of time of venture builder. Everybody in our system, they were working in a parallel in a few startups. So coming back to my point, if you are working not on a one startup, but if you are building in parallel a few startups, okay, let's say minimum 2, maybe 3 in the future, maybe more, and then you change the startups, you build startups to the some point, for example, to the first sales, and then startup studio is exiting from the startup, and you are again free, and you could start the new startup with the startup studio. So I mean that in that case, it's better for you to have a share not in a startup, in a particular startup, but in a startup studio as a mechanism. It's like the question to the customer, what will they prefer? To have 50% of the shares in a one car that is on a conveyor line, or in the fabric of the cars? For me, it's very easy as answer. Of course, in the fabric. So it's mean that in a startup studio, from my point of view, should be quite a large part of the shares that belongs to the founder in residence, or we can name them venture builders or entrepreneurs in residence that are working together with the startup studio. So part of startup studio belongs to the founders, part of the startup studio belongs to the investors that are not playing a role of active founders, and part belong to the founder in residence. So from my point of view, that is the main point, not the number of shares in a particular startup. It's change your motivation. If you are a co-shareholder in a startup, or if you are a co-shareholder in startup studio.
So it is very big, separate topic about whether there should be fractional CEOs or full-time CEOs. Let's talk about sustainable companies, how to build sustainable companies. Is it possible to be not dependent on external VC capital to build companies, especially in case of having more equity owned by the studio than by separate entrepreneurs leading these companies? Is it possible to build companies without dependence on venture capital? And how to build profitable companies? Is this a goal of a studio to build profitable companies that are self-sustainable or not?
I think the goal of startup studio is to build a startup that will acquire it by somebody, to build the startup as a product. That is a goal of startup studio. The next question is when startup studio should exit. And the answer is doesn't matter for startup studio. Startup studio could exit in 1 year, just as at the beginning, if startup studio has a client who wants to acquire startups at so early stage, just after the few first actions. Sometimes some startups could be kept in startup studio for tenths of the years. The second point is the following. From my point of view, the best situation for a startup studio is when 100% of the startup at the beginning belongs to startup studio. When startup studio is a holding that is starting their own startups. In that way, startup studio as a solo entrepreneur could do whatever startup studio wants to do with the startup. The only thing that startup studio should have be ready for the situation is a capital. That is why I think that the question is about sustainability of the startup studio, not the startup. Once again, in this question, I also transform the answer from the level of startup to the level of startup studio. I think the main difficulties, the main problem is the sustainability of the startup studio. And the question why it has its own working capital. Because it's use capital as a working capital. So it's invest, it's like uninvest its capital until the startup would be sold. Then it get back capital, invest again, get back capital. So it's definitely model that usually in venture world called
evergreen structure.
Evergreen structure. Yes, yeah, exactly. I think that the question is about sustainability of the startup studio, and the question is why the same investors that are now financing the venture funds will invest in startup studios. That is a crucial question for a startup studio. Or who would be the new investors? But I don't see new investors. I think that the transformation will be in existing type of investors. The family offices, pension funds, other types of the investments companies, corporations, definitely. And we see that the corporations are investing in corporate venture builders, corporate venture studios. And that is, for them, it's a new way of investing. So if startup studio has enough capital to start their own startups, and with a founder in residence who has equity in startup studio but not in startups, they build studio is building startups as long as it needed and then sell. That is a sustainable model.
So the main source for cash flow for a studio after the initial capital by investors is selling companies. Do you think that there should be some other cash flow streams into the studio in parallel?
You mean services?
Services or I don't know, something else. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think that the worst that could happen with a startup studio is to become consulting company. We have enough coaches, consultancies, advisors, and so on and so on. We need entrepreneurs. We need startup studios that will act as entrepreneurs. For me, it's the same question as, do you think that Tesla, during the first period, before selling the first car, should provide some, for example, taxi services using Ford cars? No. The answer is no. No. Why should they? Because they have a lot of people who could drive? Strange. Because they have Elon Musk that should provide some consultancy. If he will spend his time on consultancy, he will never build a company. If founders of startup studio will spend their time on a services, they would not build the companies. So for me, the answer is very simple. But I agree with you that sometimes you have to do something additionally. Sometimes, because it's not easy to find a proper capital. It's not easy to find the proper investors. And sometimes you are going to the compromise and you start to do something else on top of the main activity. But I think startup studio, as any company, could do this, may do this, but they should understand that it will, if they will do this too much, it will ruin their core business.
The difference between Tesla cars and startups is that if you keep your startup for longer time, it becomes more valuable usually. So like if your company is developing, you sell it at more price than if you're just like did some template first year company and then sell. And I think that this is the problem of many venture studios, that they try to sell as fast as they get the offer. And so this never allows studios to create some monopoly in a specific niche, which will be very valuable because they like created many companies. Each of them is leader in specific small product. So what do you think about this difference between cars, which are they repeat each other in a similar way, but startup studios are a bit different because the startups each product can grow in value.
Are you sure? Are you sure? For
100%.
example, in an area of you could take any technology area, and you will see hundreds of different startups with more or less the same product. Why we are talking about so different companies? No,
for example,
and
there is
no,
like fintech. There are many fintech companies. Some of them just got pre-seed round and maybe even got some offer like let me buy your company for $3 million. Another example is company which go to IPO, for example, iFirm from HVF startup studio launched by Max Levchin, a previous co-founder of PayPal. So that company started to grow in his studio. He became a CEO of this company, and finally this company made an IPO and became public company. So
what happened? What happened with startup studio?
So it is not very. If you look at, I believe if you look at this studio, this will be more prominent than most studios. But if you look at other companies, I don't know much about the other companies.
Max, I don't think that when we are talking about the model of startup studio, we should rely on particular examples of the entrepreneurs and their personal track record, because in a level of personality, it's always very strange track records. Always very strange. If we will look in detail on my track records, you will be a lot of strange things. If you look to any of on yours track record, we will see a lot of strange things. It's not about model, but when we are talking about the model, the examples of hero entrepreneurs do not give us anything. They only could bring us to mistakes. I think that startup studio should sell startup as soon as the founders of startup studio are agree between them inside startup studio that this particular startup is ready to be sold. How they could understand this? They could say, okay, we tested the business model, and yes, we got approval. And when we will sell it to our customer, the customer will be satisfied. Very, very interesting point of Startup Studio, from my point of view, is the following. The customers of Startup Studio will be regular customers. Customers should acquire dozens of startups from one Startup Studio. The same customer.
Yeah, I think
it's very important. The responsibility about the quality of your product that you are selling, it's a very important point. It's only could be measured after the customer will acquire your startup, will do something with it, and will come back to you to buy the next one. If this thing will happen, you could say, I produce a quality product. I think it will happen with the startups and with the startup studios. Customers will come back to them.
Yeah, I understand this concept. But here is another thought. When you sell cars as a wholesale offer, meaning that you're not selling one car, but you're selling 1,000 cars. So you are usually given discounts like 30% discount if you buy not one car, but 1,000 cars. In case of startups, I believe this is the opposite. The opposite meaning that, for example, in private equity, there is a roll-up strategy of buying companies in a specific industry, merging it into one big entity, and either IPO or making a bigger acquisition of this company. And so, like, investors earn by combining those separate companies into one entity and selling. And this is why I see difference between like the strategy of fast selling, when like you understand, okay, we made 5x, so we put 1 million, we are selling it for 5 million, this company,
Or for two, or for two,
or yeah, even for two. So I believe that it is like
or
not
sometimes even for one.
yeah, and in this case, you're not earning big, you're not getting big compound returns by creating something, like by keeping those companies in your portfolio and growing them, and then selling them.
Yeah,
So
yeah. You don't use yes. In this case, you don't use cherry picking strategy. Absolutely. If company should be sold, it should be sold. It should be sold. So definitely. I That is why, Max, I think that startup studio is a new model, because if I will just listen to you, I will ask myself, why should we need startup studio? What is the difference, the real difference between startup studio and let's say venture fund that is very active? I saw a lot of very active, and I knew a lot of very active venture funds, but they are still venture funds. Their partners are very active. They do a lot for their startups. Sometimes they become CEOs of startups for a period between one CEOs and other CEO. So, or let's say, let's take very active accelerator that also has some capital. What is the difference between startup studio? No difference in this way. I think the model of startup studio is something new, a real new, not just a following up of the previous model that we already know for a lot of years. That is why I am talking about something very different. The startup as a product. If we will look on a startup as a product, as a regular product, not as some boutique product, not regular product. We could look on a company as on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 parts and items that define this product. Yes, we could build some method, some approach of how it's better to build this product. And studios will compete with each other on their methods of building companies, and they will have customers. The customer relationships are the most important relationships for studios, not the investor relationships, but the customer relationships. I know a lot of corporations, medium corporations, that are, I don't know, between 1 and 5 billion revenue per year, or a few hundred million revenue per year, that would like to acquire a lot of startups because it's much more effective than to build trying to build a company inside corporations. If they have such type of supply chain, studios could be regular suppliers to the corporations, but only if studio will be able to decrease the prices of startups. If startups in a usual recognition is something around $1 billion, forget, it couldn't be done. I'm talking about startups that will cost 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 million. If I'm producing startups that average cost is 10 million, and I could produce hundreds of startups per year, that is the, let's say, goal of startup studio. Not the actual situation, but the goal of startup studio. A lot of, if you want, cheap startups. And there will not be X They will never be 10x. They probably not be 5x. They will be a few, but a lot of. Absolutely different approach, absolutely different models. To those who wants to play in unicorns, they should not do startup studio, or they should do something else, but don't name it as startup studio. It's because it's about different things. We have the full infrastructure to build unicorns. Everything we have now on a place, from accelerators and incubators to the different types of the funds and so on, all the investors and so on, everything, all the services. But we don't have such infrastructure in area of cheap startups. And of course, if we will look to the market as on a regular and as on any other type of the market, you will see on a startups market the same situation. How many startups are selling on the top of above the 1 billion euro per startup? Let's say hundreds, maximum hundreds per year. How many startups could be sell in a cost of 1 million? Millions. Calculate one and second, and you will see that the cheap market could be much larger. And I think startup studio are one of the model, maybe not only one, but definitely one of the model that could catch such type of new markets. So cheap startups for a mass client, for a regular companies, regular startups built by regular people for a regular companies. That is what startup studio about, from my point of view.
How do you think this model will affect the authenticity and passion traditionally associated with entrepreneurship? How will we keep the spark of innovation alive if startup creation turns into mass production?
Very easy. I think it will open sparks in 1,000 times more people than we see now with sparks. If you want to find a person with entrepreneurial sparks now, you should go to some special events or to accelerators, trying to find somebody with a flashing eyes. But you don't see thousands of people who do their regular business around you, but you use the products of this business. Imagine that thousands of people who previously did, for example, much easier trade business, now going to technology business. Do they have this entrepreneurial passion? Absolutely. Do they have sparks? Definitely.
There is a problem with principal agent relationships when you are not owning this company, you're owning a small percentage of a startup studio which owns many companies. And so I think that there is a problem with motivation and feeling that this company is my own. And this is similar to corporations which are not effective. So they hire some people to build companies, but it's not very effective because those people don't have skin in the game. And of course, this I believe that there is a special opportunity to create factory of startups, but this is the only what this factory can rely on, which are not big returns. Not big returns. I mean that for each startup is sold at like 2x, 3x, 4x. And
I don't agree with you. I know exactly that 500 years ago in Netherlands, it was founded a company, one of the first company that had shares in a stock market. You know the name of this company. Everybody knows the name of this company. The main trade companies or company of Netherlands that work with India and so on and so on. And shareholders of that companies were like every tenth of people who lived at that time in Netherlands. There were not any problems that you are speaking about now about the corporations. The problem of corporations is because of the existing management, not because it's a problem of the business model. So I strongly believe that the same could be done with a startup studio. If you will have a few shares, but you will work inside this system, you will get a lot of from it, and you could be even more rich with less risks compared to the situation when you do nothing or when you are playing the same game as a hero entrepreneurs.
So you think that there is no problem with
Demotivation,
not
no.
yeah.
No, I don't think so. Once again, if we are not talking about a few people in every society that are most brilliant entrepreneurs, if we are not talking about them, let's allow them to do what they want. We are not talking about Elon Musk. We are not talking about Steve Jobs. We are not talking about all these brilliant persons. We are talking about unknown entrepreneur. Unknown. If we are talking about unknown entrepreneur, we should not take the motivation problems from the hero entrepreneurs and transfer them to regular entrepreneurs. They don't have these problems. Believe.
Yeah, I would read more on skin in the game research or some ideas like why in economics there is a principal agent problem to know to understand. Maybe you're right that it's like for different people there are different motivations and there are many employees who are effective on their roles, and still if you have ownership over this thing you will be more efficient in managing it than if you are just like not considering it as it is your own. There
Not
was
always.
also
Not always. If I could speak openly about some cases that I had in my background of startup studio, I cannot, but if I could, I would give you a few examples of just the opposite. When as soon as people were getting the shares in a particular startups as a motivation, they lost fully motivation. It's not always like it's like you are telling about. It's not the 100% rules. In a lot of situations, the result will be the opposite. You will give the share and you will demotivate it absolutely with a person who will take it. Because the person, for example, will think that everything has happened. But I don't want to go to this area. But once again, believe me, it's not the 100% rule that
Mhm.
people should have their part of the shares in a particular
Yeah, this
startup
is
in order to be effective. If I would have a percent, 1%, or a 0.1% in the holding that produce startups, hundreds of startups, I will have absolutely correct motivation to build the startup than if I will have 10% in one startup. What is better? To have 1% or 0.1% in 100 startup or 20% in one startup? Everybody will tell you, of course, 1% in 100 startup because it's much less risky and it will be much more opportunity for me, for a personally me to grow than to focus on only one point and to put all my eggs in one bag. No, I don't think that is
there
usual
are different,
situation.
yeah, this is why I say that I need to read more about this topic because it's an interesting controversial for me approach that like better to have 1% in 100 than 100% in one company.
Ost Indian trade companies 500 years ago.
Yeah, your answer actually in your practice is better to have 100% in 100 companies. This is what a startup studio does.
Yes, but once again, it's not 100% in 100 companies. It's about 1% in startup studios that owned 100
Yeah,
companies.
I understand. I understand.
Compare to 100% in one startup. What is better? For me, the answer is very simple, very simple.
This is because so when I talk to studio founders, I find the same psychology like mine, which is a shining object syndrome, or like willing to have a lot of different ideas and everything at once. And there are just like two completely opposite approach. So you say that okay, a company doesn't need a CEO 100% involved, but there are I believe that more than 50% of people.
If you want to get company in a cheaper way of production, company should not have at the beginning 100% of CEO. Yes, it's over. You know the term over invested,
Yeah,
like overqualified, over
yeah,
invested,
yeah.
overestimated. So all the system that we have now is over and over and over and over.
This
And
is
I want
nature. This is nature.
no,
So in
no, no,
nature,
no, not no. I don't agree. I don't agree with you. I don't think that is nature. I
we
think
have
that
two kidneys. We can we can be with one. Nature loves over. So these are thoughts of Nassim Taleb, that nature loves over, like
I don't agree.
accumulating a lot of.
I don't agree at all with him.
Mm,
Don't agree at all. But
okay.
why should everybody be agree with him? No. It's a different types of the approach, and to feel the potential of this another approach, I think that is the most important for an audience.
Hmm.
Because in
Yeah.
another way, we just speaking about, let's put it in another way. There is two different models of startup studios. One, the first one, that is much more understandable. It's like an upgrade of accelerator together with the early stage fund, like a bit upgrade, a bit more involved, a bit more specialized or focused, a bit more, I don't know what. That is one approach, one way of defining what is startup studio. But there is another way, and I'm on this second part. That is, startup studio is absolutely different model to all that we knew and still know. And this model is about startup as a product, as more cheaper could be startup, as it better. It's mean as less investment could be spent, including the time of the CEOs and so on, and engineers and so on, as better for startups. Startup should be easily taken out of startup studio. It means it should not depend on a personalities of the startup studio. The lock should be written fully, business lock, entrepreneurial lock, engineering lock. So the startup should be like a flash card. I give you, you put it to my screen, to my computer, and it started in a new place. That is how I'm looking on a startups, and that is I think what startup studio could really change. Where startup studio could be a change, a game changer. Sorry for this a bit pathos of my speech, but I truly believe that it could be done, and it could be done if we are not talking about the next few years. It could be done in next 50 years, in next dozen of years. And I'm looking on everything that is happening in area of startup studio in this way. I see here the good example of technologization, let's say so, of this process. For example, of process of ideation. Here is a good example of technologization of how studio attracting investments. Here is the good example of how studio created infrastructure, open infrastructure in different areas. Here is open manufacturing. Here is open other types of the sources. Here is a good example, the fourth one, where the startup studio get a good approach how to assess the skills of potential founder and residents, the fourth, and so on, and so on, and so on. So it will not be done by some one person. This model, it will not appear it as a product of some genius. No, it will grow through the years. But in one moment, we all see somewhere, I don't know where, absolutely new model, and we'll say, wow, how it could be done. And then we'll start to remember, oh yeah, here it was an example, here it was an example. If you will look to any of such innovations in models 500 years ago as a clusters, 300 years ago as a fabrics, 150 years ago as a transnational companies, you will always see the same situation. Nothing, only the previous type of the model, but then, and the new one. Who did it? Somebody who just put together all the puzzles. This experience from here, this experience from here, this experience. That is why I love very much what you are doing. Because you are helping to people to see these puzzles, the best examples.
I love talking to you because you have many controversial thoughts which are really groundbreaking, I would call it. Yeah, I found so. This is why it's very interesting to discuss.
Good. Maybe for today it's a bit enough, but
yeah.
I hope that we could continue our discussion in the future.
Yeah, this is super. Yeah, Denis, thank you very much.
Max, thank you, and all the audience. Thanks for listening to this a bit tough conversation, but I hope it will be also interesting, not only for Max, but also for the people who are listening to us.
Yeah, super.